The tourist shoved the guard, thinking he could get away with anything. But the guard's unexpected reaction changed everything. What happened next was a lesson for everyone. London. Buckingham Palace. The midday sun bathed the square in a golden glow, and the air buzzed with the ceaseless hum of activity. Tourists, like ants, scurried between gates and lawns, vying to snap the most impressive selfie. The clicks of cameras, the shrill laughter of children, and the boisterous chatter of adults filled the atmosphere. Near the main gates, against the monumental backdrop of the palace's facade, stood a guard, motionless, embodying the living history of the place. Michael, a 28-year-old man clad in a perfectly pressed red uniform, polished black boots, and an imposing bearskin hat, stood with his rifle at the ready. His face was expressionless, his gaze fixed on a distant point. Anyone who looked at him might think, now that's what resilience looks like. But inside, Michael was simmering. Having been a guard for 5 years, he knew that noon marked the peak of what he called the tourist circus. This time, the lead clown was Bob, a tall beer-bellied American in his 30s wearing a shirt that would make any designer cringe. Its garish print of palm trees and flamingos seemed to scream, "Look at me! I'm a tourist, and I can do whatever I want!" Bob strolled across the square with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him for the price of his plane ticket. "Hey, buddy! Are you even alive?" he shouted as he drew closer to Michael. "Come on, give us a smile, will ya?" he added with a goofy chuckle, winking at his wife, who already had her phone out to record. The crowd perked up. Some people laughed, others pulled out their phones, and a few shouted teasing comments. "Check if he's a mannequin!" someone called out from the crowd. Feeling like the star of the show, Bob took another step forward, slinging his camera over his shoulder. His face radiated the smug certainty that this British guard was merely part of the entertainment he'd paid for. "Ha! If you won't smile, maybe this hat will keep my head warm," he said brazenly, reaching toward Michael's imposing bearskin hat. "Take a deep breath. We all understand how ridiculous the situation was. What was going through Bob's head? Hard to say. Perhaps he genuinely believed rules didn't apply to him, and that he was there for a good laugh. Or maybe he simply wanted to be the next viral sensation, because, let's face it, who can resist a few extra likes for a bold stunt? Michael remained motionless, though inside he was boiling. He recalled his instructor's words. "Stay composed. You are the face of the Royal Guard. If you give in to these clowns, you give up everything we stand for." But with each movement of Bob's hand, the urge to break protocol grew stronger. The crowd chuckled. Some filmed the interaction, eagerly anticipating something memorable. And let's be honest, the laughter of a crowd is fuel for people like Bob. The louder it gets, the bolder they become. Bob paused, but only for a moment. His ego demanded more applause. Smiling at the crowd, he slowly stepped even closer to Michael. His gaze exuded the self-assuredness of someone who believes the world owes them respect. "So, what's it like, buddy?" Bob sneered, cocking a hip and tilting his head mockingly. "Standing around all day like a statue? Are you even human or some kind of robot? Maybe you're just programmed, huh?" His voice was loud and derisive, each word designed to draw laughter from the onlookers. Predictably, the crowd responded as Bob had hoped. Some burst into laughter, others shouted, "Ha! He's definitely a robot!" The lenses of phone cameras were now all trained on this unfolding drama. The tourists' faces lit up with anticipation, everyone eager to witness something viral. Then, out of nowhere, a coin landed at Michael's feet. It had been tossed by a scruffy teenager of about 15, wearing ripped jeans and a bright green cap. Grinning ear to ear, the boy shouted, "Hey dude, earn yourself a tip!" The crowd chuckled, and some even clapped. One tourist jokingly added, "He could sell that hat too. Bet someone would pay for it." But Bob, determined to reclaim his title as King of Provocations, took another step forward, now so close to Michael that he was almost touching him. His face twisted into a daring smirk. "All right, enough of these kiddie games. Let's test your resolve, Mr. Unshakable," Bob said. Then, with a slight push, he tapped Michael's shoulder. The crowd collectively gasped. The hum of chatter instantly fell silent. Even the air seemed to tighten, humming with tension. Everyone froze, waiting to see the guard's reaction. Michael stood his ground. His face remained as impassive as ever, but behind his eyes, a storm raged. He could feel his pulse pounding in his temples, his inner voice screaming, "How can anyone stoop this low? This is beyond disrespectful!" Bob laughed loudly, though a hint of nervousness crept into his voice. "Ha! He didn't even flinch. Now that's some discipline," he said, but the cracks in his confidence were starting to show. Michael hadn't moved, but his icy, focused gaze seemed to pierce through Bob's bravado, straight to his core. The crowd murmured. Someone whispered, "This is going too far," while others kept filming, hoping to capture the climax. Bob clearly wasn't ready to end his performance. The crowd had inflated his ego to its peak, and now he saw himself as the star of this circus. Smirking with the confidence of a victor, he stepped across the white line that separated the tourist area from the guards' territory. This was the moment when even the boldest tourists froze. Everyone knew crossing that line was a strict taboo. But apparently, Bob had decided he was above such rules. "Well, pal, do I have your attention now? Or should I come even closer?" he taunted, swaying slightly forward. And that's when something happened that instantly changed everything. Not far from the gates, a little girl of about 5 years old with blonde curls and a pink backpack tripped over the curb and fell onto the cobblestones with a cry. Her wail echoed across the square, drawing everyone's attention. The sudden noise startled one of the horses ridden by another guard. The animal jerked sideways, nearly rearing up. Panic began to ripple through the nearby tourists. Someone screamed, others began stepping back, and the girl's mother froze in confusion, unsure of what to do. Michael, assessing the situation in an instant, broke protocol, something he'd always held sacred. He sprang into action, striding quickly across the square and scooping the little girl into his arms. His movements were precise, confident, yet incredibly gentle for someone in full ceremonial gear. Within seconds, he carried her to safety, returning her to her mother. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. "He moved. Is he really a guard?" People couldn't believe that Michael, who seemed the embodiment of stillness and iron discipline, had reacted so quickly and skillfully. But Bob, apparently oblivious to the gravity of the moment, broke the silence with a loud laugh. "Well, would you look at that? You can move," he sneered, clapping sarcastically. "Maybe now we can grab a pint together, huh? You've earned a break." That was his mistake. Michael, having returned to the white line, turned to face Bob. His expression remained calm, but now his eyes gleamed with steely resolve. For the first time he spoke, and his voice cut through the air like a blade. "Duty to one's country is not a show," he said clearly and firmly, "but mockery of tradition is a disgrace. Don't you think it's time to stop?" The words hung in the air like the toll of a bell. The crowd gasped collectively. All eyes previously fixed on Michael now turned to Bob, and in those eyes there was no longer admiration or amusement. Instead, there was judgment, shame, and irritation. For the first time, Bob faltered. He glanced around, trying to gauge the crowd's reaction. "Hey, I was just joking," he stammered, his voice far quieter than before. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. A few people put away their phones, while others stood silently, waiting to see what would happen next. From the moment Michael spoke, the very atmosphere of the square seemed to shift. The crowd, which just moments ago had been lively and buzzing like a swarm of bees, fell into a hush. It wasn't just silence. It was realization. Some tourists stopped recording on their phones, only to immediately begin uploading their videos to social media. Hashtags like #RespectTheGuard, #TraditionMatters, and #Guardians of Honor quickly began appearing under the first posts. The crowd began to clap. At first it was hesitant and scattered, as if unsure whether it was appropriate to break the lingering tension. Then the applause grew louder and more confident. People shouted things like, "Now that's a true professional," and "We're proud of you." Some simply yelled words of gratitude. Even the most indifferent tourist couldn't help but feel the weight of what Michael stood for. Bob, however, still standing on the wrong side of the line, looked utterly bewildered. It was as if he couldn't comprehend how the situation had turned against him so quickly. He raised a hand, as though trying to stem the tide of judgment. "Hey, I was just joking. This was, well, all part of the fun, wasn't it?" he said, his voice lacking its earlier bravado. He attempted to laugh, but it came out hollow, like a coin dropping on stone. No one laughed with him. The crowd's gaze had shifted. No longer entertained, their faces now reflected disappointment and outright disdain. Michael, without another word, returned to his post. His steps were precise, every movement deliberate. He adjusted his bearskin hat, stood at attention, and resumed his silent vigil, as though Bob and the entire scene had never existed. The crowd began to disperse, but the murmurs continued. A few people kept recording, now focusing on Michael's composure. Within hours, social media was flooded with clips of the scene, captions declaring him a true hero. The comments left no doubt about public opinion. Now that's what honor and dignity look like. This guard saved a little girl and defended his traditions without wasting a single unnecessary word. Why aren't there more people like him in the world? We need more Michaels. Bob slinked away from the square, his head hanging low. His flamboyant flamingo print shirt no longer seemed bold or funny. It just looked ridiculous. The crowd parted silently to let him pass. Even his wife, who had filmed the entire spectacle, looked as though she wanted to disappear into the ground. Bob's bravado had evaporated, replaced by a dull sense of humiliation. When Bob finally disappeared around the corner, the square returned to its usual calm. But everything felt different. Michael, motionless as ever, now commanded not just respect but reverence. He had become more than a guard. He was a symbol, a lesson, a monument to true honor. Even the most audacious tourists regarded him differently now, their gazes filled with newfound admiration. An elderly couple approached the white line. The man, leaning on a cane, said softly, "Thank you for your service, son." Michael, of course, didn't respond. He simply remained at his post. But deep inside, he knew this day would be remembered by everyone who had witnessed it. And not because of Bob's foolish antics, but because of what it truly meant to be a guard.